Hi everybody, this is going to be my presentation on vitamin B12. Another name for that is cobalamin. To start off, vitamin B12 is the only vitamin with a mineral secure in its structure. You can see it here in the center. This red is the cobalamin in the middle of the vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 is only found in animal foods. The RDA for adults is 2.4 micrograms per day. The daily value is 6 micrograms per day, so that's what you would find on a nutrition label. Our typical intake, because as you can imagine, this coming from animal foods because of the American diet and how much meat we eat, our typical intake greatly exceeds the RDA. Men will commonly have 6.3 micrograms per day and women around 4.6 micrograms per day. There is not currently an upper limit set for vitamin B12. So the major functions of B12, vitamin B12, are for proper red blood cell formation, neurological function, DNA synthesis, and some fatty acid metabolism that I'll talk about later that is specifically for the metabolism of fatty acids with an odd number of carbons in their chain. So as I mentioned before, the food sources for vitamin B12 are all of animal origin: meat, poultry, seafood, eggs, and dairy products. The especially rich sources are organ meats like liver, kidneys, and heart, as well as, the non-animal fortified foods like ready-to-eat cereal. So deficiency and toxicity. As I mentioned before, no upper limit has been set for vitamin B12 because no harmful effects have been observed. Deficiencies in vitamin B12 can range from mild to severe. The severe form, caused by malabsorption or insufficient intrinsic factor production, can lead to pernicious anemia. And pernicious anemia is an autoimmune disease that affects the gastric mucosa and results in gastric atrophy. This leads to the destruction of parietal cells, achlorhydria, and failure to produce intrinsic factor. This is kind of a compounding problem because that causes vitamin B12 malabsorption, which, makes the problem worse. Untreated, this will result in megablastic anemia and neurological disorders, even with sufficient dietary vitamin B12. So once you've lost that capacity with the intrinsic factor to absorb the vitamin B12, it doesn't matter how much you have in your diet, you won't be absorbing enough. Those that are especially susceptible to this are the elderly because they've lost that capacity with the intrinsic factor. They have lower production of that. Anybody with a malabsorption disorder, that could be caused by a medication, a surgery on the stomach, anything that would mess with the intrinsic factor, and especially vegans, obviously, because they don't consume animal products. Vegetarians are also at risk, but especially vegans are at risk for developing vitamin B12 deficiency. Outside of the vegans and vegetarians, it's more commonly a problem with the intrinsic factor, excuse me, than the low dietary intakes because of that typical American diet that includes so much meat. So the nutrients function in metabolism. Vitamin B12 is necessary for two enzymatic reactions. The first is the one that deals with the DNA production. Vitamin B12 goes through a series of reactions, starting with the coenzyme methylcobalamin, and that is required to create the enzyme methionine synthase, which forms the amino acid methionine from the amino acid homocysteine. And the resulting methionine is used in SAM, which serves as a methyl donor in methylation reactions important to DNA and RNA regulation, myelin regulation, which is the sheath around your nerves, and the synthesis of many biochemical compounds. This pathway links folate and vitamin B12, so low B12 reduces your folate byproducts as well and can cause symptoms of folate deficiency. So sometimes it's hard to know what the deficiency actually is in the diet. The second function of B12 is to form the coenzyme, or main function, I guess, coenzyme 5-deoxyadenosylcobalamin, which is required by the enzyme methylmalonyl mutase. This enzyme is used, as I said, in the breakdown of irregular fatty acids that contain an odd number of carbon molecules. Mutase allows those fatty acids to be oxidized through the citric acid cycle and then provide energy to the body. Most interesting thing I learned is that, kind of a contradiction, I guess. So there is no upper limit set because they haven't observed any toxicity level. However, I also found in my reading that in some instances, B12 and B6 have been indicated to help prevent cancer. However, there's also research suggesting that high intakes of these nutrients may promote tumor growth. One study in particular found that for men, not women, just men, vitamin B12 supplements were not chemoprotective for lung cancer, and they may have even been harmful. So I found that interesting. This is definitely an area that is being studied currently. Vitamin B12 is a very popular supplement for increasing energy. There's quite a few claims that vitamin B12 will kind of be the magic bullet to fix, but there's also research that it's potentially harmful. So another article that I read in the media is that vitamin B12 deficiency in older adults can create symptoms similar to those of Alzheimer's. This study that I read showed they took a group of people with Alzheimer's, a group of people with vitamin B12 deficiency, and then it was a prospective study where they followed them for a few years. And they found that while the symptoms were similar, the disease process was different. And those experiencing the vitamin B12 deficiency, they were able to see some improvement in their symptoms with vitamin B12 therapy, whereas that was not the case in the people with Alzheimer's. So in conclusion, kind of my takeaway with most vitamins is to be aware of your intake. Consume a diet with a variety of meats and milk and different things that will give you vitamin B12. But yeah, be aware so that you're not overdoing it. Sensitive populations should especially pay attention. Excuse me, such as the elderly, vegans, or vegetarians, and anyone with an absorption issue from a surgery or a medication or whatever the case may be. Those people should consider supplementation, but definitely do that under the supervision of a primary care provider or a nutritionist. And these are my references. Thanks for taking the time to watch.